our AI code gen agent, which is awesome. But then, like it's a dedicated agent focused on design, a dedicated agent focused on product and writing specs, and a dedicated agent focused on writing code. And the funny thing is, like, these agents can collaborate with one another.
Wow.
And human beings can get involved in any step of the process.
I want to back up and just kind of highlight this because this is so cool. You have multiple agents doing multiple different workflows, and they can collaborate with each other in your app.
Yep, exactly.
That's
and
amazing.
So like, if you think about writing a product spec, right, it's actually the type of thing that like an AI can do really, really well if you give it like the correct context, right? So
yeah,
like,
it's trained on all the product specs on the internet and all
Exactly.
the YouTube videos and like all the product specs that have ever been written, all the books, all the articles that analyze product spec, PRD books. Like it's trained on all that. So it can write a better product spec probably than at least a top 10 or 20% product spec.
Exactly.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we are thrilled to have Kevin Michael, the co-founder and CEO of Tempo Labs. Kevin is an experienced product leader and engineer with a background at spanning Perpetua, Social Capital, that's cool, and Microsoft. Oh, I was there. At Tempo Labs, he's been pioneering AI-powered tools to transform front-end development, making collaboration between designers, product managers, and engineers seamless. Very cool. We're excited to have him. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Brian. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. Haven't probably seen you since like we made the investment around demo day.
Yeah.
So it's good to catch up. This is like what's great about having a podcast is you could get the founders back on and keep building that relationship.
We've been pretty heads down building for a little while. And I think that now we're kind of coming up for air and letting the world know who we are. And one of the things I believe is like, you're either quiet or you're loud. There isn't really any in between. And so anyways, it's just time for us to make that transition.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to, maybe you could start by telling the world out there, as it were, what Tempo Labs is and why you started it and kind of what you guys are solving.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so Tempo, it's a code-first design tool, and it's a visual editor for React. The whole point of it is to allow designers, product managers, and engineers to be able to collaborate on code, right? So Figma was truly transformative by allowing organizations to be able to collaborate on designs. But, now with the capabilities of the latest AI models, really anyone can become a coder. But when it comes to collaborating on code, there isn't really like a great platform, right? Like Cursor has obviously been amazing, been killing it. But when it comes to PMs and designers starting to dabble their feet into code gen, those tools aren't necessarily the best. And so we've been building Tempo for a little while. I think the core motivation for starting Tempo came from our dissatisfaction with the legacy generation of low-code tools, pre-AI, and specifically Retool. At our previous company, Perpetua, my co-founder and I, we would get the product team to prototype new features using Retool, test it with customers, get real feedback, and then when we were ready to bring it into the core product, we would get the engineering team to essentially throw out the Retool prototype, start from scratch, right? And really the genesis of the idea for Tempo was like, hey, why doesn't Retool just like integrate with my existing React code base? We put all this effort into creating this high quality design system, all of these components. Why can we get this kind of low code type UX, but built more and architected more like an IDE, right? So to integrate with our production code base. So that's kind of the genesis of Tempo.
That's always been kind of the dream, as a guy who's been building products since, 2010. I remember back in the days you had InVision, right? So you do a clickable prototype, you kind of and it's really a designer doing all these mocks. And I remember having like hundreds and hundreds of mocks in these clickable prototypes. So you could have customers click through them and test them and see if they're interested in buying the thing if you build it. And then Figma came out and that just kind of revolutionized everything. And now kind of the next Tempo Labs, I would imagine, is the next iteration of that, which is like, hey, can we make this faster from kind of the design to the code, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's all about climbing the ladder of fidelity, right? So like at the lowest level of fidelity, you have like a paper and pen sketch or a whiteboard sketch. At the highest level of fidelity, you have code, right? And what AI is, and like those InVision prototypes that you're talking about, right? That the whole unlock and innovation there was, hey, we can get to like higher level of fidelity more quickly, more simply, and using a different set of team members than just engineers. And yeah, I think Tempo and kind of what AI is unlocking today is the ability for anyone to go from idea to like really high fidelity prototype very quickly, very easily. And yeah, we're excited to be building one of the best tools in the market to unlock that type of workflow.
That's amazing. So you've been an engineer and a product leader. How has that influenced the way you're approaching building this AI-driven development tool?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun story. I was an intern on the Visual Studio team at Microsoft, like back in the day. And if anyone's familiar with the programming language Lua, I wrote, the Lexer and the parser, the language service that powers Lua in Visual Studio. So I fell in love with really dev tools back then. And I think the really cool thing about the Microsoft developer division is that there's this real culture of building for yourself, being the customer, dog fooding. And I think that's why, Microsoft has built such incredible developer tools. And, VS Code is the kind of the king that it is. I think that being an engineer and a product person, I was always like, prototyping was always a critical part of my workflow. So like, if we were just starting a new company or a new product or something like that, I would often, be heavily involved in like coding up the first prototype. And I always push my teams like, hey, prototype faster, get higher fidelity faster, get feedback from customers faster. And I think that's impacted my philosophy on product is like, prototyping is a really key part of the workflow. Key thing that we believe at Tempo is that every product manager is going to become a technical product manager. Every designer is going to become a design engineer. And Tempo is really, the best IDE for those types of people and to unlock collaboration cross-functionally across those different roles.
It was like my last role at Microsoft too, is I went back to product and I rebuilt MSN Money. It was kind of like a place I could park myself while I launched my venture fund, because product I can kind of do in my sleep. And I was running a larger team on the Azure marketplace, and it was just like too many meetings, and I just could not function. And I remember thinking yeah, all this is sort of blending. There's a kind of almost like an identity crisis happening right now in the product, in that triad of product, engineering, and design, and they're kind of all blending. So maybe you could talk a little bit about historically what those roles were that you mentioned and how you see them kind of transitioning, especially with Tempo and other tools.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that the best teams, the best companies are the teams that ship the fastest, right? Why do startups win over large incumbents despite, far smaller budgets? It's because of speed, right? So like, I think in the software industry, any role, any team, any person that can move faster, ship code to production faster will beat those that move slower. And I think that, again, the most cutting edge, ruthless teams, everyone's going to be shipping code using LLMs, using AI. And so I think historically, there's this very clean separation between product that would write the PRD, pass it off to design, that would then create the design, that would then pass it off to engineering, that would then write the code. And it was this very disjointed kind of process that took a very long time. I think AI is allowing, PMs to do a bit of design, right? Or designers to do a bit of coding, or, like you said, that's kind of mesh of worlds. And so that's where I think Tempo is trying to build for to unlock that type of collaboration, right? So that teams can work together. There isn't so much friction of like, how do I check out the code? Where do I share it? Where in Git do I look? Which files do I need to be familiar with? Tempo's building like a very visual, intuitive interface that makes it possible for any PM, any designer to be able to contribute code.
Yeah. That's amazing, because I love the vision, which is it speeds up that development cycle, because it was always the bane of my existence as a PM, 10, 15 years ago, where, we'd get this beautiful design, and then what came out the other side was kind of like half baked. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like this does not look like the design at all. And Figma kind of bridged that a little bit more, because at least it was HTML, CSS that developers could just basically wire it up to the CRUD or whatever, to the API layer. So you mentioned React. Like, why is that important? Why is that an important kind of framework for Tempo?
Yeah, so I think Tempo is building, I think, generally for the web. And, we might have some exciting announcements coming soon when it comes to mobile and whatnot. But I think to build a really high quality product, you have to be opinionated. And I think that, by drawing the constraint of saying, hey, we're just focused on React, it allows us to build a lot of really high quality, useful features. Like as an example, like the idea of components, right? And like a design tool like Figma, components and your design system are really, really critical. And I think when it comes to building a really high quality kind of components creation management experience, I think building around React allows us to build more useful, more valuable, more helpful tools. It doesn't mean that we won't expand beyond that, but the React market alone is just so massive.
Yeah.
And the ecosystem is like
pretty much the leading front end framework now.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we can grow very large just in React before having to worry about kind of expanding from there.
Yeah. I remember when it came out, I mean, it was incredible. The demos I saw, and we started re-architecting our app this like 10 years ago. And I was like, oh, this is so much faster and cleaner. And just everything about it was better.
Yeah, totally.
So it's nice to see that 10 years later, it's really taken a foothold. How did your time at Perpetua shape your approach to startups and scaling business generally?
Yeah, I think that is a really good question. I mean, the first thing, Perpetua was building for Amazon. Like it was Amazon kind of brands that were Perpetua's core customer base. And so we tried to imitate a lot of the core values that Amazon has and talks about. And I think the core of it is like customer obsession, right? I think Amazon's like, one of their core tenets is customer obsession. I think we really embodied that at Perpetua. So, and when it comes to Tempo, as much as we're building like a dev tool that's, very like read the docs, never talk to a human type of experience, like we have in-app support, chat support, where I kind of try to, folks on my team and myself, we try to support users one-on-one. And that has hurt us a little bit because we've been growing so fast that like, it's hard to keep up. And so sometimes we have like, a couple of days lag here and there. I think just customer obsession, right? Like talking to customers, listening to them, being able to build for every, like just to understand their needs very deeply. I think that's like a core thing that we learned from our time at Perpetua. I think the other key insight from Perpetua that led to Tempo itself is we had this at peak, let's call it 60-person kind of product engineering org. And we had this key insight that like only 15% of the code that we were writing was true like intellectual property for Perpetua. The rest of like the 85% of the code that we were writing was just like the same boilerplate kind of front-end React stuff, back-end DB, CRUD APIs, data engineering pipelines and stuff like that. And I think that wasn't unique to Perpetua. Like most software businesses, it's only a fraction of the code that they write that is true intellectual property. And I think how that informs our perspective on AI dev tools and how they'll evolve is just that like in-house engineering teams are going to focus more and more and more of their time on just the IP, right? So like if today the average team spends only 15% of their time on that, I think that percentage will go up to like 75, 80%. And I think that the rest of the quote unquote boilerplate, like undifferentiated code is going to be written and automated using AI. And again, we're trying to build, the best tool to help capture a large part of that workflow.
Yeah. So how do you guys fit into that whole landscape? Obviously, AI assisted coding is booming. You got Copilot and you got Cursor, and where do you guys fit in and differentiate and carve out your?
Yeah. I think that there are a few key things. I think one, like our product is not a no-code tool. So compared to a lot of the like maybe other tools that are targeted at non-technical people that don't want to ever look at a single line of code, Tempo is actually built to be more like an IDE, right? It's meant to integrate with your existing code base. And so with that may mean some kind of technical skills that might be involved there. But at the end of the day, it's not a text-based editor. It's more of a visual editor that feels, again, like a design tool, right? So our kind of one-liner is like, it works like an IDE, but it feels like a design tool, right? So it's very different than something like Cursor because it is collaborative and visual, right? It's something that's much more approachable to someone like a product manager or a designer and gives them the ability to hand off much higher fidelity prototypes or assets for the engineering team to then build on top of. So that's the first kind of piece. And the second piece is just that we are trying to build, again, for production grade code bases, right? This isn't for, indie hacker trying to build non-technical indie hacker trying to build like a micro SaaS app in a weekend. Like for sure, AI and Tempo is great for that, but really what we're focused on is trying to help people build production grade code bases and kind of team environments and in collaboration.
Yeah. I mean, if you guys succeed in this vision, and so far so good, do you feel like this tool kind of replaces Figma in a way where now the product managers and designers are using this to hand it off to the Scrum teams to build?
Yes and no. So I think that, Figma does not replace the necessity of a whiteboard, right? In the sense that like a whiteboard is lower fidelity than Figma, thus it's faster. It's easier for someone to just like get across something and an idea.
Yeah, you can use wireframes really quickly.
Exactly.
There should be that wireframe tool. I don't know if people still use it.
Balsamic.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So in the same way, I don't think that Tempo fully replaces Figma because sometimes you just need a really quick, low fidelity way of getting an idea across. And so I think to that degree, Figma will always exist the same way whiteboards will always exist. But I think that a large part of what teams spend their time doing in Figma is actually very high fidelity work. And I think a lot of that work will end up being in tools like Tempo and more like kind of code first.
I would never say never. I mean, look at InVision, right? I was shocked when I got the email that they were shutting down. I was like, wow, this is like a tool I used every day for like 5 years.
Yeah, we have a lot of respect for Figma. We have a Figma plugin that we recently released that has been getting some good traction as well. But it'll be very interesting to see how everything evolves.
Yeah, how do you think about that? Like integrating with other platforms versus sending them to your own? Because obviously Figma is the 800-pound gorilla. They got a $20 billion offer from Adobe to buy them out, which got shut down, I think. And so how do you think about, okay, we're kind of competing with them, but we can also cooperate and maybe integrate into their system and until people realize like, hey, our system is a little better for what you need to do? Like, how do you think about that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, I think that our product actually, because it's an IDE, right? It's a fundamentally different category of product. And so in that sense, I think that it almost competes more with VS Code than it does with Figma, but expanding to a new market altogether, right? So like the idea of like designers writing like and contributing code, or PMs writing and contributing code, isn't necessarily like a core part of what is like the Figma story today.
Yeah.
And so to that end, I think we're actually unlocking like a net new market. And to that end, I think that, yeah, like, listen, we want to be friends with everyone, collaborate with everyone. You know, Figma is a very respectable company. We'd like to work alongside them. I think that a good analogy is kind of like Webflow and Figma, or Framer and Figma, where, you know, they are like competitive in some sense, but they really work hand in hand in many organizational contexts. And I think Tempo will be the same way. Like you'll kind of have like Figma and Webflow and Figma and Tempo. That's kind of how I think about it.
Kind of walk us through kind of that integration and handoff, you know, where you guys fit in. And, you know, imagine, you know, an organization of 100 engineers and designers or whatever implement you guys. Do they still use VS Code and Cursor? Do they still use Figma? And then they also use you? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So I think that like when you're doing some of the foundational design work, like establishing your design system, establishing your kind of like brand identity, I definitely think a lot of that work will continue to live in Figma. I think the moment you have clarity about your design system, I think that a lot of your kind of prototyping design workflows will migrate to Tempo. As far as, and then I think that, again, for a lot of the, let's call it like straightforward features, I think that a lot of the code will be generated within Tempo. But I think there will still be a handoff to engineers, then move into a tool like Cursor or something like that to take it the last 20% of the way there, or to handle the 20% most complex tasks, particularly on like the business logic side. But like, again, I think the handoff from Tempo is like partially completed pull requests that engineers can complete in Cursor. And so that's kind of like the vision right now. I think over time, it'll be interesting to see how the models themselves evolve, how necessary, you know, something like that is. Like over time, you can imagine that like the amount of times an engineer needs to sit and write business logic in Cursor with like, you know, a lot of control, that it's just going to go like down over time. And so to that end, I think that, yeah, I think a lot of the workflows will migrate into Tempo, but I think there will always be times when serious engineers want to write code by hand and just write that code for 10 hours, or, you know, do something an AI can't. And I think a lot of those things will live in Cursor for quite a while.
You know what's interesting about technology? I read this book by Kevin Kelly, What Technology Wants. I don't know if you ever heard of this book. He was the founding editor of Wired Magazine, writes really great books. He lays out this thesis in the book, which is technology never really goes away. It just sort of morphs, and you can still find every piece of technology. Somebody's producing it somewhere. Even the most arcane, you know, gumball machines from the, you know, the early 1900s, somebody is producing it somewhere. And so it doesn't really ever go away. It just sort of morphs into a new state of being or a new useful category, or maybe just a hobby. So maybe somebody will keep InVision alive. What are the biggest misconceptions, you know, product teams and engineers about AI-powered code generation?
I mean, I think that, again, it depends on the type of persona, right? I think a lot of non-technical people, like, you know, new design engineers or new technical PMs or new, like, you know, non-technical founders, they're amazed by what AI is able to do from their kind of initial tests, but then they get extremely frustrated when it doesn't listen to them. And so it's kind of like this love-hate relationship. So I would say, like, you know, we're seeing this, and it's not just us, like every AI code gen tool that's trying to generate a lot of code is running into this issue where, again, non-technical people who are writing code for the first time, they're really struggling. Like I saw a really funny tweet from the Supabase CEO where he was talking about how their support load has increased by like 40%. And they're getting questions that they've never gotten before, where someone would be like, hey, how do I run a Linux command on my Postgres database? Or, you know, how do I get HIPAA compliance? And, you know, I have no idea how this, what my technical stack is. Like AI just did it for me. So I think that, yeah, non-technical people, I would say, are overestimating AI and its capabilities based on like initial demos and initial tests. Yeah. And I would say like overly technical people are on aggregate underestimating in what it's able to do. Like I think that, and the trajectory that it's on, I think that, you know, there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, you know, I'm going to be in VS Code like forever. And again, I think the answer is like kind of.
Just to review the code.
Yes.
I mean, you can imagine a world where it's like an AI generated pull request where some product manager said, hey, we need to build this. And it goes and, builds the whole app. And now it's just it's almost like an engineering manager or a manager of managers, VP of engineering kind of code review. Like, oh yeah, that looks good.
Exactly. I think that for that 80% of kind of boilerplate undifferentiated code, Absolutely. That's the world that we're going towards. I think there will always, I think for any like serious software company, they'll always be doing something innovative, something outside of the box, something creative that you just, it'll be hard to really get an AI to kind of figure it
and
out.
that's the whole thing that people don't understand a lot about kind of technology and the way it actually creates more demand and more supply of everything over time, right? And so coding has been done for decades and decades, but there's more coding being done than ever before, but it's easier than ever to code, right? And so now when you have AI generating kind of that 80 to 85% of the undifferentiated code, there's going to be more coding done than ever before, because now all the developers are freed up to do the more interesting creative things, the more imaginative things. And there's still that other 85% getting done by AI, and maybe that's 95% eventually.
Exactly. Yeah, there will be like a large increase in the number of people that are like writing and contributing code. There's no question about that. I think the number of lines of code that is going to be created is only going to increase, not decrease.
How amazing that, like a product manager can talk to, an app like yours and get a pretty highly functional prototype with code and hand it off to developers to kind of finalize.
Yeah, exactly.
That just changes the whole scope of being a product manager. You said like there's this merging of the technical PM and the regular PM, right? And with the designer and technical designer. And so now you can we'd be like, no, we have the app here. It kind of works. AI made it. Now we just need you to polish it, finalize it, and make sure it's HIPAA compliant. Yeah. And it's scalable and all that stuff.
And also, again, if you play it forward 6 months or something like that, or maybe more, plus or minus, in Tempo, we are excited about virtual collaborators, right? So the idea of our AI code gen agent, which is awesome, but then, it's a dedicated agent focused on design, a dedicated agent focused on product and writing specs, and a dedicated agent focused on writing code. And the funny thing is these agents can collaborate with one another.
Wow.
And human beings can get involved in any step of the process.
I want to back up and just kind of highlight this because this is so cool. You have multiple agents doing multiple different workflows, and they can collaborate with each other in your app.
Yeah, exactly.
It's amazing.
So if you think about writing a product spec, right, it's actually the type of thing that an AI can do really, really well if you give it the correct context, right? So
it's trained on all the product specs on the internet and all the YouTube videos and all the product specs that have ever been written, all the books, all the articles that analyze product spec, PRD books. It's trained on all that. So it can write a better product spec probably than at least a top 10 or 20% product spec.
Exactly. So again, the idea of an AI PM that lives in our product, an AI designer that can live in our product, and then an AI code gen agent or AI engineer, if you will, that lives in the product, right? And these agents collaborating with one another. I think it's going to be very exciting and very fast how people are going to be able to build software.
You have to pay, go forward 5 or 10 years, and AI is very, very powerful. What is, of those 3 jobs, the core triad of software development, which one gets automated away first? Or blended into one of the others, kind of consumed by one of the others?
Yeah, our belief, we're extremely long human design, and we're very short boilerplate code. So if you're a front-end engineer that doesn't really do anything particularly innovative and you don't have good design sense, I think that just simply being able to write the React components or guide cursor to do that is something that I think gets automated away over time. I don't see a world in which there are front-end engineers who are not innovating
MFAs,
at technical
design
level.
thinking becomes more important in the future. How do I humanistically think about the human-computer interaction here?
Exactly. But the reason why we're long human design is if the cost of developing software goes down to 0 and everyone is doing it, right? Then the question is how do you stand out, right? You have 100 AI, SEO bots and 100 AI cold email generators and micro SaaS apps and all this stuff. It's how do you stand out, right? And I think the answer to that...
We're already starting to get there, right? With all the agents and all the cold outreach and...
Yeah.
It's we need agents for our agents and agents for our agents.
Yeah. And so I think that the teams that win are the teams that figure out distribution and the teams that figure out design. And I think that design is a core part of distribution because at the end of the day, we as humans are kind of vain. We look for things that are beautiful, that inspire us, that motivate us, that expand the way in which we think, right? Or are novel or delightful. And I think to that end, really good design is just really key. And AI will also get really good at design and help you. But again, at the end of the day, you need someone that can use these tools creatively and direct it and have an opinion, have a perspective in order to do great design.
That's amazing. It's a challenge for me as an investor too, as I look at startups to invest in, which is why I invested in you guys. I was like, okay, what's unique about this? And in hindsight, it's that product design background, because you kind of bring both and you bring something unique. And a lot of investors, that's what we're looking for now, right? Because there are, 85% of the startups, just like the code, are not differentiated. And so you're kind of looking for like what's kind of unique and special about your approach, about your distribution, about your team, about your design, and all these things. So it's there's lots of corollaries to what's happening down here in the code base to what's happening up here in at the meta level of startups.
Listen, I think as an investor, like the question that I would ask is like, what percentage of your code is unrelated to LLMs? And of that code, what percentage of it is like unique or differentiated or novel or proprietary? I think that in our case, a very large percentage of our code base is the visual editor, right? Which is a lot of non-AI things that are unique, novel, and differentiated. And so there's like a kind of a technical moat that we're building over time. And I think that, listen, AI is just so good that it's easy to build really cool LLM wrappers that, go the distance. And again, if you have great distribution and great marketing, like you can build a pretty big business, build a brand, that brand has value. But I would just say, like, if you're looking at differentiation, I wouldn't think of it in the kind of theoretical differentiation perspective and more in the technical differentiation perspective of like, how much unique and interesting, novel, proprietary code are you writing?
I love this. I've heard other people opine that we're in the throes of the end of technical differentiation. Would you agree with that? Do you think there's like a new dawn approaching where kind of post AI code gen we'll invent new ways to create technical moats?
I agree with that on aggregate, in the sense that, again, like as the cost of developing software goes down to zero, right? The ability to copy and the ability to mimic or clone something it's only getting easier, it's only getting faster, it's only getting cheaper. So I do think that, like, in so much as you have 3 or 4 or 5 players competing in a space, I think that the products will converge pretty quickly, more quickly than they have in the past. Now, that does not mean that a certain team cannot maintain an edge, right? If they're always pushing the boundary, continuing to innovate and whatnot. Like, I think that, so that's why, like, I think just the bar for success is so high now. It's like you need to have cutthroat execution on the product side and marry that with incredible distribution, which is really hard to do. But I think that if you have those two, like, you can still maintain an edge, grow your market share, build a brand that has value, equity value in and of itself. And so, like, I don't think there were ever technical moats, maybe is my point. Like, even before, I just think that it was hard, much, much harder to replicate, much slower to replicate. So again, I think that, like, technology is an advantage and will continue to be an advantage, but I think that, like, the convergence between competitors will only happen faster and faster than ever before.
This episode of the Ignite podcast is brought to you by our friends at Build, spelled BYLDD. Build is a development agency that specializes in helping early stage startups, especially non-technical founders and teams, build and launch scalable, revenue generating software products. Most startups don't have $100K to hand over to a big agency, and honestly, for your first product, you probably shouldn't. Sure, you could try rolling the dice on some freelancers, but that's a gamble with unclear costs and a lot of project management headaches and no guarantees. That's where Build comes in. For just $10K in about a month, Build can turn your validated idea into a real product that's ready to go to market. It's a smart, efficient way to build a foundation for a company of any size. And yes, companies that start with Build can and have scaled very large. Their clients have gone on to be backed by YC, Y Combinator, and Google, and raise funding at multi-million-dollar valuations. Ready to get started? Head over to build.com. Again, that's BYLDD, to connect to Ayush and the team and let him know you heard about Build on the Ignite podcast.
Well, it's funny, as put my MBA hat on, marketers would say the only moat is brand. They'd say fundamentally that's it, right? Why is Google maintain its, market share over Bing? Bing is just as good. If you just go run, and I used to work in that same org at Microsoft where we ran the side-by-sides with Google all the time. The net cumulative gain was the metric. Anytime we roll out a new algorithm, or what do you think about that phrase? Brand is the only moat.
I think that I agree with that, to be honest. I wouldn't say, like, I think to say that it's the only moat is maybe a little extreme or intense, but I definitely think that, like, in a world of AI companies growing extremely fast, I think that the companies with the brand will win. So, like, Cursor is kind of a good example of that, right? Where, like,
they have such a powerful brand right now.
Yeah.
But is it better than other code gen tools?
Yeah, exactly. And, like, I think after them, there's a whole bunch of, like, VS Code forks, and there's, like, memes around it and stuff. And, like, some degree the products might be like just as good, maybe like, slightly worse in some way, but like they have a brand, right? So like I think that it's never been more important than it is today to build a high quality brand.
Well, and Cursor might end up being the MySpace of code generation tools. They might end up being the Alta Vista Lycos search engine.
I think that's like the scary thing, but also the opportunity is that consumers are really interested, like they're really open to switching.
So and same with developers, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And so
they're always forking new tools and trying them out and, try this thing out, try this out. And
most of our customers are having come from trying one of our competitive products or one of our competitors' products. And a lot of them are like, oh yeah, like I tried this, and like, here's why I love your product. The cool thing is like, they're just down to switch, right? It's still very early days. Like as much as a lot of these companies are growing really, really fast, I think it's still very early days and the jury's out on who the winners will be. So It's exciting to see what will happen.
You've mentioned making engineers 10x developers through better collaboration. What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, I think that helping engineers focus on the tasks that only they can uniquely do, right? On the code that only they can uniquely generate or they can uniquely write and guide and architect. I think that's how we make engineers particularly productive, right? Get rid of all of the BS work they do on a day-to-day basis. And so I think Tempo, a huge part of that is like, hey, the initial assets and artifacts that exist in the software development lifecycle are front-end designs, right? So like, let's build a workflow where, other folks on the team can kind of take on a lot of that heavy lifting so that you as an engineer can just focus on like the 20% final stretch, last mile of complex business logic, proprietary IP.
It's like the whole history of technology, really, right? Back all the way to the agricultural revolution. Hey, instead of, I got an idea. Instead of like walking through the fields gathering berries, we'll just like plant some plants here, It frees up time. Hey, I got an idea. Like instead of toiling away on the farm, we have these tools now that can plow the fields and, automatically do this. Anyway, so let's switch to fundraising and scaling. You've raised funding from some top investors. What's the biggest lesson from that experience of fundraising?
I think that the biggest lesson is that like your internal conviction is the most important thing that comes into being successful at fundraising, but also being successful at not being influenced by fundraising. Because I think that like there's a common like a meme around how VCs are all lemmings. It's like, and I've experienced this multiple times. Like you talk to like,
who else is in the round? By the way, who else is in the round? No, I was just joking. Like
exactly. Yeah.
I actually don't care. Like I literally don't care who's in the round.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've actually seen.
I just want to know how much is committed to the round. I don't actually care who else is in the round. I can give a shit because I make my own decisions, and I think it's like almost like a negative signal for a VC to ask that.
Yeah. What I've like from my experience, what I've seen happen is like we'd be talking to a number of investors, and like they're like on the fence because there's something contrarian about what we're doing. We're a little ahead of our time, and so people are a little bit skeptical. And so like
you can't be too late to a market, right? You can be too early though. We were just talking about like Google and Alta Vista and all that stuff. 18th search engine, right? So
So what will happen is like you'll have these investors who are scared to commit and they're basically like on the fence or kind of saying no. But then the moment a prominent investor says yes, everyone wants to pile on. All the folks
they're writing $1 million check. I want to come in.
Exactly. All of the folks that were like dragging you along for a very long time, suddenly they're in because to them, someone reputable was able to develop conviction, and that's kind of what justifies their investment kind of thesis.
These are my proudest moments as an investor, because we write little 25 to 100K checks. That's been our kind of check size for years and years now. I think in future funds, we'll scale check size and volume of investments. When I'm the first 25K into like a $2 million round, it's just like, that was me. Like I did that.
Yeah. And like the interesting thing about us is that we have had offers on the table for way more than we've raised. Like let me edit this. I'm going to start again. The funny thing about us is that we have said no to more capital and more offers than we've said yes to.
Wow,
right.
That's amazing.
But part of the reason is because we would go through this like initial long drawn out fundraising process where like folks are struggling to commit, and then overnight everyone wants in and there just isn't enough space. And so that's been our experience. And I think that part of that is again because we've been working on some things that are like a bit contrarian, working on things a little bit early ahead. Like when you invested, it wasn't really clear where LLMs would go or how good AI would get at code gen. Like it was
What batch were you again?
Est-
Wow, so we're talking like 9 months after ChatGPT launched.
Exactly. So it was like super early days, right? And everyone was like, oh, will it ever write good quality code? You know, will you ever be able to do something without an engineer? And it's like only really recently that people are really opening their eyes to what's possible.
I've been watching this for 20 years since I read Kurzweil's book, since I watched Star Trek in the 80s. I knew all this stuff was coming. It was just a matter of when.
Yeah.
And so like, and then I was looking at the trends, right? The trends of how fast this was recursively improving from the first demos I saw back in like 2017, 18 to ChatGPT's release. And then I think 4.0 was probably out by the time you guys graduated the batch.
Yeah, that's correct. After we got into the batch was like right around the time when they were starting to give out access and stuff.
Recursively just getting better and better and getting 5 to 10x better a year at that point. So
yeah, exactly. So yeah, to kind of answer your question, like my experience with fundraising has been, you know, it's very slow and then it's very fast all of a sudden.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think that the key is just like stay convicted, right? Really believe in like the first principles of whatever it is that you're doing and like hold strong to that. And I think a key thing for us as well is we're building for ourselves. Like we are our customer. And so like we know what it is that we like, what we would want, right? And we know why we don't enjoy using the tools that are out there on the market or why we believe there's a better way. And it's only a matter of time before you find somebody that believes in that vision. And so, yeah,
I can't believe it's been a year and a half since the batch you went through. It's crazy how time flies.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good advice. I think about this too as an investor. Like if I'm, you know, after fund 4 or 5, do I go, you know, like Hunter Walk and those guys homebrew? There's like, I don't know if we want to raise another fund. I think they recently decided to raise another fund, but like there might come a time where I'm just building for myself. I'm just investing for myself, you know?
Yeah, totally.
I've been thinking about that. How did you go about crafting a compelling pitch? I mean, you know, it's a competitive space. YC gives you lots of direction as well. I think they do probably the best pitch decks in the industry.
For us, our approach has been, what is the product we would want to use ourselves, right? Like, what are the problems with the products that are out there on the market, and how are we going to solve those problems like in a way that's different, that's differentiated, and just like tell that story and tell that story cleanly, and also show demos, right? Like for us, people have always just been blown away by the demos that we've shown, and that's I think been a core part of kind of our fundraising strategy. It's like, let the product do the talking, let it sell itself, and eventually, you know, let the metrics sell themselves. But I think that's been like crafting a pitch is like paint the vision of what you want, what you believe the future is going to look like, and share your conviction with others and help them see where the world is headed. And it's funny because a lot of the folks that invested like more recently, they're folks that said no initially. And a lot of them are like, oh yeah, like I said no initially, but now I'm realizing you guys were right the whole time. And so it's been pretty edifying for us, like basically done no pivoting. Like the product has expanded in some ways as LLMs have improved, but we haven't really pivoted. Like we've just been building for ourselves. We've had a consistent vision. We just, you know, we're a little crazy in what we're trying to accomplish because it's so hard, but we just keep going.
I love that. What's been the biggest challenge in hiring and building the team so far?
Yeah, I mean, so we're not based in San Francisco like a lot of YC companies. We're based in Toronto, and I think hiring has been awesome because there's a lot of incredible talent here. One of the things that's slightly contrarian for the kind of Toronto market is like being in person 5 days a week, pretty hardcore, you know, hybrid flexibility and stuff. So, you know, we've had a few offers that have gone out with candidates we were excited about, but at the end of the day, they're like, yeah, I kind of want to be remote or kind of want more hybrid and stuff. And I think that there's much more of an in-person culture in San Francisco, which is why I think, you know, like San Francisco is one of the best places you could be. We're trying to get the best of both worlds and build.
Yeah, if I was a startup, I'd be in a big metropolitan area like Toronto, San Francisco, and I would be in person.
Yeah, exactly. And so
it doesn't work for every company, but it depends on what you're building too.
Yeah, exactly.
Team Ignite will always be remote.
Yeah,
you know, as we scale.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you kind of balance innovation with keeping the product developer friendly?
It's really hard. It's really hard, but I think the key is just talking to customers, and when they have a lot of pain, you have to drop what you're doing. So like even now we're like super hyped about releasing this like new piece of functionality, but then, you know, a customer was really pissed off about a certain bug. And as much as like, you know, as long as you create channels and avenues for you to hear that pain, that feedback, you almost should let your customers influence what you do. And so I think just
talk to your users, talk to your customers.
Yeah. Exactly. Stay close to your customers.
How do you do that? How do you do that properly at scale? As you know, it's easy to do when there's 2 or 3 founders. You're constantly doing that founder-led sales, but how do you do it as you kind of scale and keep that pulse?
I need to figure out how to scale it because right now I'm personally fielding 200 support inquiries a day. And like at peak, I had a day on Thursday last week where I had 100 in a day that I had to get through. Obviously, and I spent literally my entire day just doing customer support. So I'm still figuring out how to scale it. And there's some like AI things that we're testing and flows that we're changing. But
Yeah, can you have the engineers take on some of that? Like, okay, there's like a rotational shift. Everybody spends an hour or two every day doing this.
Yeah, totally. I've been like triaging it. Like I do
Yeah.
pass off, like our
Okay.
engineers' time is precious. So,
Right.
and like, you know, I would say 25% of the requests are non-technical people trying to figure out how to run terminal commands or figure out what Git is or those types of things. So I'm trying to get AI to like answer those questions for those
Right.
people.
Is there a
But
solution
yeah.
for that, or you just have to build some wrapper around 4.0 or something, or 0.1 or 0.3?
So we're using Intercom's Fin agent, and it's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's like decent. I would say it, you know, resolves, I don't know, 10% or 15% of tickets, which, yeah, and I think that over time it'll increase because I think that it trains itself on your past conversations that you manually answer. So like kind of like that 15% I could see going to 35% in like a couple of months if we stay on it.
So they use your manually addressed support tickets to train it in a kind of a RAG system or whatever.
Exactly.
Wow, that's really cool.
I don't know. Again, we're still figuring out exactly what we're going to do. Like, you know, the traditional kind of PLG developer go-to-market relations playbook is more like community Discord docs, more like scalable channels. And we're going to invest in all of those things more deeply as well. But, you know, from my Perpetua background and kind of more like sales-driven B2B, you know, traditional B2B background, I just like talking to customers one-on-one. As painful as it is, now it's, you know, hitting some walls of scalability, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I think that like having too many customers to talk to is a very good problem to have.
No, that's great. Yeah. I mean, it's a problem I have too as a solo GP for Team Ignite. I've started to realize I need to schedule time to get important, not urgent things done.
Totally.
You know, otherwise I just get bogged down. It's just like there's just so many death by 1,000 paper cut email things happening at all times. You know, multiple Slack pings, multiple emails that are on fire. That's just, you know, and I'm like, okay, I'm not getting to this other thing I need to always do on a daily basis or weekly basis.
Totally.
Yeah. All you have is your time. Let's switch to kind of the future of AI and some tech trends, stuff like that. Kind of an under the radar trend in AI that you think will be huge in the next couple of years.
I mean, I don't know if these things are under the radar because, well, actually,
maybe for some people they are.
Yeah, I think one thing that is slightly under the radar is like Cerebras. A lot of people hype up Grok because it's so fast, but like Cerebras is like insanely fast. And for whatever reason, I don't think they have as much like brand recognition as Grok. There are some like pros and cons to their system, but I think like Cerebras is pretty under the radar, if you ask me. Underrated. Like,
so they compete with their foundational model that competes with Grok and
yeah, and so by Grok I don't mean X like Elon Musk Grok. I mean Grok, like the chip company that does like they do like llama inference like really really fast, but you know Cerebras is like oftentimes very like much faster. I don't know the latest benchmarks, but like when Cerebras first announced Cerebras inference, like they were doing 1,800 tokens per second on one of the base like llama models, which I think was, I don't want to misquote it, but significantly faster.
Like an order of magnitude faster than the existing inference hardware layer. So you can set up your inference on standard kind of NVIDIA chips, you know, whatever A100s sitting in the cloud and get a certain tokens per second.
Yes.
And Cerebras came out and said, hey, we got something for you.
Yeah.
An order of magnitude faster.
Yeah. So Cerebras, so it's 1,800 tokens a second, which is like practically instantaneous. Like I think, you know, most of the models you interact with are probably around like 250 tokens per second is like kind of like the average, right? So 1,800 tokens a second is almost instantaneous. And I think that, yeah, for them, their core innovation, again, I hope I'm getting all the details right, but like they just have like a massive wafer of silicone and just like a much larger chip, which is how they run these things so fast.
So it's massively parallel compute on custom silicon. And so it can do this massively parallel large language model, which has billions of parameters, and they can just compute it faster because it's like custom silicon in the same way that like NVIDIA has customized for training in a lot of ways or processing gaming graphics. Now you're getting these like new generation of chips. That is, first large language models were invented, and then they were kind of fitted on top of CUDA and NVIDIA's chips. And now there's this move towards the hardware layer of like, okay, let's conform the hardware layer to the large language models and make them even faster. Is that kind of what's happening?
Exactly. They're innovating at the hardware layer, at the chip layer, and in doing that, unlocking like dramatic speed improvements.
It's amazing. Wow. If you're starting from scratch today, would you build an AI again, or would you be looking at a different space?
Absolutely. I'd be building an AI today. Yeah. But again, I think that like the key though is like trying to find a problem or an insight that exists like outside of AI.
Yeah. I think you guys had the right idea at the right time.
Yeah.
You know, It was like the right idea, right time. That's a lot of what I do as an investor is I just look for right team, right idea, right product, right time. It's actually pretty easy. It's just hard saying no, like 99 point something % of the time. It's like, it's just not quite the right time for this, or
Totally.
anyway, what's next for you guys? What should we be watching for in the coming year or two?
Yeah, I mean, this year is a very, very big growth year. Like, I think that we've already started, like we launched the product kind of for self-serve usage end of December. We turned on monetization on Christmas Eve, and things have been growing very, very fast. So I think a lot of growth ahead. I think that the product is going to reach parity or like near parity with some of the tools that it's trying to displace without calling any of these incumbent tools out by name. But like right now, the product, it's kind of got 80% of the functionality, but it's kind of like that last 20% that a real kind of pro user needs to rip and replace for their day-to-day workflow. So I think a lot of just like getting from 80% to 95% parity is a lot of what we're focused on the product side. I think focused on integrations with common tech providers like API libraries, cloud infrastructure providers, I think is just to make that whole process of spinning up a software product more seamless, faster, giving our AI all of the context that it needs. So like a lot of integrations and just really unlocking fine-grained design control for designers in particular when it comes to kind of front-end code gen.
Yeah, amazing. Well, let's wrap up with the rapid-ish fire. I call it rapid-ish because sometimes it ends up not being very rapid. What's the most exciting AI tool outside of your tool that you're using right now, either daily or weekly?
I mean, I think like note takers are extremely, extremely valuable. Again, like we care a lot about talking to customers and like we record every single customer call. And I think that those, like their ability to summarize action items, like it just, those are my favorite kind of category of products. We use Fireflies, which is the product
me too.
Yeah, that's the product that we use. And I think that's just been pretty transformative.
Yeah, I love recording my founder calls for that reason. It just makes it so much easier for me later to go like, what was the traction again? And what was that? And what was this other thing? What's the best piece of product advice you've ever received?
The best piece of product advice I ever received was listen to users deeply, but take all of their feedback with a grain of salt. There's like that classic Henry Ford quote, like if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Obviously, he went on to invent the automobile. And I think that is really, really important product advice because most of the time customers are right about their problem, wrong about their solution. I think that the greatest product leaders are able to deconflate the two, really understand the problem very deeply, and then work with a smart team to kind of identify the best solution that surpasses the customer, like even the customer's own kind of imagination.
Yeah, really well said. I love that. What's harder, raising venture capital or hiring top engineers?
I think hiring top engineers definitely is very difficult because the top engineers always have extremely good jobs with extremely large upside. And so trying to convince them to take a bet on something new is always difficult, but having a network obviously helps.
Yeah. Who is the first person you call when you need startup advice?
Other than my co-founder, obviously, but other than that, previous colleagues from from Perpetua who were like kind of other founding executives that we work very, very closely with. I think that we have a shared understanding of how to build a company and, we know the depth of their experience as operators. And so we lean on them quite a bit. And then also some of our lead investors, like they're just really, we're very blessed to have them. And we definitely ask for their advice frequently.
If you had to start a company outside of AI, what industry would you pick?
The one thing I want to build, and I'm going to build this kind of using Tempo, AI storytelling for old people and kind of family trees. Like, I really think that, like, I have two grandparents grandfathers who've lived with my family for a very long time. They're getting pretty elderly. I don't know how long they'll be with us, and they have so many good stories. I'd love to have an AI ghostwriter that just talks to them and basically
just records it and captures it.
Exactly.
Synthesizes it. Yeah.
Puts it in like story format that is like, and I could almost tune it like, I have a 1-year-old kid now. So like when he's like 2 or 5, it's like, okay, explain these stories like a 3-year-old picture book or something like that, and also have that in kind of like family tree format so that it's more of like a social graph or a social network. Anyways, cool. It's just one random product I really want to build. Personally, I'm going to build using Tempo, but that would be...
The camera's running. You just never know when your loved one will pass. My dad passed pretty young at 59. It was like a long time ago now, 13 years ago, but I only have like a few videos of him, even though he died in 2012. So like, I just wish I just kept the camera running more.
Totally. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. We all die, right?
Yep.
What's the best AI generated code output you've seen so far?
So many.
Where kind of outputs them, you're like, wow, it did that?
So the first, like one of the first mind-blowing customer emails I ever got was from a captain of a barge, like a sailor on a ship. And he used Tempo to build a routing app to help route him from kind of port to port. And it like includes like maps and, it's like this crazy like application. And so I think that was just like my first like mind blowing, like, wow, like it's crazy that literally like a captain of a ship is able to build himself like personal software, and he was able to use Tempo to do that.
Was he a coder on the side, or did he just kind of talk to the app and figure it out?
Yeah, so he had some programming experience in like 1996, but he hadn't so he had like some technical background, but then like he hadn't
knew a
touched
little
it
HTML, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Wow. That's amazing. That's got to feel pretty cool.
Yeah.
What's the most underrated skill for the modern software engineer?
Design.
Yeah.
I think that like really high quality design sense is like a force multiplier.
I wonder if we'll start seeing that kind of merger on the educational level, of engineers, where you have to take kind of engineering becomes a multidisciplinary discipline.
Yeah. I think that like there's a very left brain, right brain kind of set of class of problems. And so, but whatever it is, I think this idea of like the design engineer, like there aren't really a lot of design engineers out there in the industry today, but I think that that number will 10x, and it'll be a combo of designers migrating into design engineers, or kind of traditional engineers migrating into design engineering. But I think that that's going to be like a massive trend that we see, because those folks are really valuable, and valuable people like that make a lot of money. And I think the free market will do its work to promote that role.
I love that. What's one thing about front-end development that hasn't changed in the last 10 or 15 years?
I mean, HTML, JavaScript, CSS are like the heart of everything. CSS is like shockingly, as much as like our product is built on top of Tailwind and everything boils down to CSS. And
wow, I
think it's just insanely powerful. I think like it's just crazy how far we've gotten with those three languages and the heart of the browser. So it's I don't think it's really going anywhere.
What's a prediction about AI that most people would disagree with?
I think that there's very little moat in the concept of like agents. I think that prompt engineering is extremely easy, and it is so easy that it's not differentiable at all. And so if one company says that their agent is their edge, I would heavily discount that, because I really don't. I just like, again, prompt engineering is so easy that I don't think that like the LLM agents and the work around that is really like the core moat or IP. Again, the best leaders will obviously have like very sophisticated agents that are not necessarily, it's not like a single prompt or something like that. Right. Like there's a lot of complexity and evals and all these things that go into it. But at the end of the day, I don't think that that is the IP of any AI company that will endure.
These agents, these LLMs are eating themselves, right? Where they're generating their own prompts, right?
Exactly.
With chain of reasoning, that's all it is, basically. Like prompt, response, let me analyze that. And so prompt engineering was kind of like, I don't know, it'll be this intermediary step that kind of goes away, where the agent can reason through your requests based on all the context.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Well, where can folks find you online?
Yeah, we're at tempo. Or me personally, or the company. Yeah, you can find Tempo at tempo.new, and we're dropping the labs in our branding, so it's just Tempo.
Okay, nice.
And you can find me at Kevin1Michael on Twitter, and the Tempo Labs Twitter handle is Tempo Labs.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It was really awesome catching up with you. Really enjoyed it.